Hello, and welcome to the revised version of the Fire Emblem Last Promise here, present Growth's tier list based on how useful I believe the units will be during the playthrough. This is empty now, and there's a reason why, but first, I'm going to be turning this in reverse order, compared to what I did last time, and I will be splitting this recording in half partway through, just so that so that it's easier for me to record this. So starting off in the utility tier, keep in mind, all the units after this unit are not being tiered because they're just extra portraits that have been added in here. Starting off in the utility tier, at the lowest part of the utility tier, we have Luke. He is the convoy. Just think of Merlinus. He has no additional uses outside of being the convoy. So he is literally just a free deployment for the convoy, and that's not very helpful in some maps, although it's useful for buying things, but in theory I'm not buying that much. Next up is Inanna. Inanna is the worst of the flyers in the game. Her base stats are not that good. Her combat is really bad. Her flight utility is pretty good for Siegfried mode and early Anakin mode, but she's outclassed by her sister, who I believe rejoins earlier than her. And because I don't have access to the early Elysian whip, I can't get her to promotion, so she doesn't have the advantage of 8 move going into Anakin mode, like she normally would in LTC or maybe a casual playthrough. Next up is her sister Lyran. Well, maybe not sister, I forget the relationship they have, but she's, again, flyer utility, and the second worst option for it. Her base stats are better, though, so she's able to do it, she's able to be more useful with it. She's just the same as Inanna, but with slightly better combat, and she will actually be seeing a tiny bit of combat. Next up is a weird unit who you might not expect to have been placed here. Arthur. If he promotes, if I'm able to get him to promotion, he will gain C-rank stabs and some minor stat boosts. This allows him to use stabs like Barrier, with a bit of training, Recover, Restore, Physic, which, yes, they're not going to be super helpful, and he himself won't be that helpful. It's just, it's a nice option to have. If I'm unable to get him to promotion, he will go up in here. But because I'm going to train him because nobody else in Anakin in Siegfried mode really needs the training, besides Sean and I guess Noah's weapon rank, it doesn't hurt me in any way to train him over some other units. Actually, sorry, next up should have been Tamiko, the first staff user we get. She has a base E-rank stabs. Her stats are awful. They're worse than Arthur's would be. They're worse than Emma's are. And again, base E-rank stabs, there's nothing really good about her. There's no real reason for me to use her. Next up would be Altares, who is decent combat, and originally I was planning on promoting him to Assassin with the second fell contract, but that loses me the ability to steal, and yes, there aren't that many good stealables, and enemies tend to be faster than he is, to the point where he needs a speedwing in order to steal a crucial item. Well, he'd be getting the speedwing anyway. Just enable it to be stealing, just to allow me to steal more items. But yeah, he's just a really good utility user. He's a thief. He has a plus 15 crit bonus, and he will be seeing a little bit of combat in the early game of, well, not the early game, but when we get him in Siegfried mode, and then a tiny bit in the early game of Anakin mode against some axe users and possibly some sword calves, although I wouldn't bet on it. I'm trying to think who else goes there. Yeah, and the last unit in this tier is Anakin, the main lord. Anakin is incredibly weird to place because he's a very squishy lord with very bad combat, but he's a dancer, so long-term use would make sense for him, but he's more utility because he will never be seeing combat, and that's mainly what's going to be in that tier. However, his dancing utility is incredibly good, even though this isn't normally an LTC. It allows things to be done a lot easier and faster, which makes them safer. I don't have much to talk about in the utility tier, but in the little to no use tier, I have slightly more to talk about. First unit in that tier is Logan. Logan is the only unit in the game that we will not be recruiting, simply because there is a route split in Chapter 12, where we either pick between Logan, who has awful bases, well, an awful strength base, compared to Ashkir, who has a base of 17 strength. And Logan has, I believe, base 5, so it's a much easier thing to tell. And also he has B rank axes, D rank swords, which is a lot more useful than his base C rank swords. I believe it's C rank. Because that means he can use hand axes and steel axes against the Lance Cavaliers. Next up in the tier is Sia, who in a Grotzfrun is normally very good, because she snowballs easily. She is effectively Nino from Fire Emblem 7, but joins a lot earlier. But in this, her bad base stats hold her back. She's base 16 HP, she's very frail, she doesn't, I think she has like base 7 magic, which is enough to be decent chip damage, but we also have Storm by that point, who is just a more mobile version of her. And we get Haas soon after, who is a more mobile version of her with better stats than Storm and literally anybody else in the mode, which is unfortunate because we really like Sia. She will be deployed a total of, I believe, 4 times once we get prep screen. Well, just a total of 4 times in general. Once we get the prep screens, because there's no reason to not deploy her in one of the later maps for Siegfried mode, and she's deployed for a recruitment who's crucial to the run. Next up is Itsuki, who has slightly better base stats, but he has a couple more uses because he joins in a map where there are a lot of Cavaliers that are very physically bulky. And the next map has a lot of Cavaliers that are very physically bulky that he has no trouble dealing massive chip damage to them. He's a very, very helpful unit for that reason alone. He also brings an energy ring, which I'm not in the route that we're taking, which I'm not going to count as a point in his favor. That's not really a use for him because any other unit bringing that energy ring would have it, but it's just a nice little thing that gives him a little bit of credit from me. Next up is Rex. Rex in a Grotzfrun can be decent, and he joins level 10, so he's worthy of a Night Crest, and I'm not sure if I will be using one on him, because he's the only unit who feasibly could reach and use the threshold for them. If I do decide to promote him, he would be at the very bottom of mid-game combat, but as it stands, he's little to no use because I do not see him I do not plan on using him. Although his stats hold up fairly well, but he does fall off shortly after he joins. Are there any other units in this tier? Yes, there are. This right here is Mark, and I guess I can also put him alongside Psy. Mark over Psy. Mark has both of these guys only have one real reason I'm considering using them besides water walking utility on Mark, and that's because they can both use the Dragon Axe, I believe at base, in Chapter 20, which is full of Wyverns, which is a map that I'm worried about. Psy, I believe, joins with one, and they both have a decent enough strength in order to help bring down Wyverns. They also have Mark has some water walk utility, I suppose. Which can be useful in a couple maps, I'll admit, but we also have Flyers, who have better combat. I might promote Mark at some point just for a 6-move water walk bot who can rescue someone. Maybe, because he does get outclassed by a unit who joins later. I believe that's the end of that tier. Looking through, yeah, technically there is one more unit who could fit in there, but I'm not going to. Early game combat, this is mainly going to be about Anakin mode, but I'm also going to apply Siegfried mode to it because Siegfried, Sean, Corbin, in this order. Well, no. In Siegfried mode, Siegfried is just superior to Sean, and Sean has slightly better stats for combat than Corbin does, and he is much more useful because of the piercing sword, which Corbin does not have access to. But in Anakin mode, all 3 of them are bad. However, I do have to train Sean in a few instances. I have to train up his sword rank, and I have to train him up. I don't have to train him up to level 10, but I'm going to train him up to level 10 if possible, just to make my life easier. Is he that good? No. In a Grotzfrun, he's decent, but this isn't a Grotzfrun, and all 3 of them are active liabilities in Anakin mode, with the exception of Corbin because his bulk is okay enough, I suppose. Sean and Siegfried, when forced, are going to need to be protected in Anakin mode. Luckily, both of them can rescue the other, so they only take up 1 tile, and they can run away from enemies. Next up is Shuda, and Kevin. Shuda is very, very helpful in Siegfried mode. He is the best combat unit in Siegfried mode for a couple chapters, at least. Whereas Kevin is very helpful, more so in Anakin mode, because he's very physically bulky, and enemies there have a hard time damaging him. Neither of them are going to be promoted, but they will be trained up slightly, because I want Shuda to be able to use higher rank swords like Killing Edges and Lance Reavers, just so I have another decent combat unit, because his stats are okay enough to the point where he can deal some damage in Anakin mode, even if he doesn't double, and he doesn't deal, like, he can use, if he gets to Lance Reavers, he can, say, deal, like, 7 damage to a Lance Cav, which can help chip it down so a unit like, Noah or Karina can pick him off. Is that the end of the early combat tier? Yes, it is, because these other units are easier to place. Well, I guess, no. Storm goes here. He's the best of these combat units. Oh, is he? Yes, he is, because he is fast. He has a personal bow called Stormbringer, which makes him faster than he already is. He brings a killer bow, I'm pretty sure, so he has high crit. He doubles a fair amount of enemies. He can hit a lot of enemies really hard with the killer bow. Is he ever going to promote? No. He's not like Wrath. He is just inherently worse Wrath. When he returns in Siegfried mode, in Anakin mode, he might be slightly useful because he uses bows, but I don't think you should bet on it. So if you're a fan of Storm, I'm sorry, he's not going to be very helpful. Next up is the mid-game combats here. In this tier, I actually have more to say about these units, like Zack. Zack arguably can go into the little to no use tier, but I believe he's just barely good enough to fit up here, because he's able to take out a couple enemies. He's able to significantly help with some enemies, because he has access to rifle bows, which, while inaccurate, are decent chip damage from 3 range, so most enemies cannot counter. He does bring a killer bow. His stats are okay enough to work for a couple chapters, which is more than I can say about these. And he also can deal with some bosses pretty easily, like the boss of, I believe it's chapter 15 when he joins, has a Delphi shield. And once that gets stolen, if I can steal it within 0% growth restrictions, I'm pretty sure he just has a 100% chance to kill her with a crit, with the killer bow. Not to mention, bows aren't that bad, and yeah, he does get outclassed by other bow users. He's not that terrible, and I can see someone being willing to promote him just because the slight boost to his stats makes him slightly viable for slightly longer. Next up is, where is he? Kellock. Kellock is better than most of the combat units in the game, starting off, because his base stats are really good. They can carry him and the rest of the party for a fairly long time, and when he starts falling off, we get better units. Not to mention, his 2 personal weapons are pretty good, the Flamberge and the Ectaris, although the Ectaris is not going to be that helpful. It does mean that if I needed to win a specific fight, I would be able to, because it's a strong enough weapon that it doesn't require that much, effort put into Kellock to raise him, because all he requires is training. And when it comes to that, there's no real reason to not train Kellock when he's forced most of the time. And yes, I know not training your lords, or not training a lord, you don't need to train your lords is what I'm trying to say. But he's forced in a lot of maps. His combat is okay enough when he's promoted, to the point where he's okay enough and it doesn't get one-rounded by enemies once he's promoted in later maps, which allows me to be more free with his movement and deployment. Basically, I don't have to worry so much about him as I do for Sean or Anakin, because both of them get one rounded and even one shot in the late game. Whereas Kellock can avoid that. Next up is... Who is up next? Arguably I could put Yue there, but I'm not going to. I'm going to put Karina and Ben here. I don't remember when the first Elysian Whip comes in, but it's definitely going to go to Karina. Is it? I don't know, actually. But Karina and Ben are both the two best flyers we have for a while. Karina joins in Chapter 11 of Anakin Mode, well, which is the first chapter of Anakin Mode, and is the best way of dealing with some of the physically bulky enemies because her base stats are really, really good. Let me just check real fast to make sure. At base, she has 30 HP, 10 strength, 13 skill, 12 speed, 11 luck, 10 defense, 5 resistance. Yeah, those are all good enough for quite a while, and it takes a while for her to get one-rounded when she's rescuing someone. She's genuinely a useful unit. And Ben has better stats and better rescue utility, but he joins later, and he's not as necessary when he joins. If they get the first Elysian Whip after the point where Ben joins, then it's this. But if it's before, then it's this, because she'd be promoted. Both of them also join at level 10. I'm pretty sure both of them. I think Ben joins level 15, actually. Ben joins at level 10, yeah, with 10 strength, 12 skill, with 12 strength, 12 skill, 10 speed, 10 defense. So he is pretty similar stats. Worse promotion bonuses, but it doesn't really matter. Both of them are quite good upon promotion. Well, quite good for a fair amount of time. Next up is Noah. Noah is the best combat unit in Siegfried mode, and he does need a little bit of effort put into him. Investment. Like an energy ring, the energy ring from Siegfried mode, nobody else who would want it is available, and yes, I'm pretty sure it is wasted to give it to him, because when he rejoins in Anakin mode, he's supposed to get auto levels. It's a wasted thing to give to him, but it allows him to get a guaranteed one round on a boss that is normally irritating to kill, without having to rely on a crit, and it just makes his combat that much better for Siegfried mode. Whereas, like, who else would I give it to? Nobody else who's useful in Siegfried mode, in Anakin mode, keeps their stats, because the only other unit I would consider giving it to is Haas, who isn't around in Anakin mode, and he also, I believe, gets auto levels, so there's no real point in doing that. Next up is Ace. Well, actually, no, Ace should be here. I don't know why I waited so long to put him in. Ace and Eduardo. Eduardo down here and Ace down here. I completely forgot about them. Eduardo has a Brave Lance with 5 might as a personal weapon. That's okay enough. Both of them are just early game flunkies. There's nothing really special to say about them because this isn't a Groats run. I have no real reason to train either of them. Their base stats aren't that spectacular. I'm just going to check Eduardo's real quick. Just make sure I'm telling the truth with it. Yeah, Eduardo has base 9 strength, which is decent, and he has 30 HP, 5 defense, so it's hard to kill him, but he also only has 6 speed, so it doesn't take that long for enemies to start doubling him. So, he's basically better Corbin, but Corbin isn't that great to begin with. He does more things, and he's more important to the early game, though, so I'd much rather play through the early game of Anakin mode with Eduardo than I would, I'd much rather play without Corbin in Siegfried mode than I would without Eduardo, because he's just a free unit who's there. And Ace's stats are worse, but he's arguably more useful because he's a free deployment slot. Actually, no, he should be down here. He's the worst of the early combat units, even worse than Sean and Corbin, because they at least have Siegfried mode utility. That's the end of the mid-game. Well, no, it's not. Ashk also fits in here, but he's better. He's better than Noah just because he's around more and he has base 17 strength. He's really good. The probably last chapter where he'll be deployed is the Wyvern Valley. But 17 strength and the Dragon Axe means that even if he doesn't one-shot a Wyvern, he'll come pretty close. And it's not going to be a contest. He's going to be very helpful. Next is late game combat tier. These last two tiers blend together but I just want to make a distinction because long-term use is units who I'm training long-term, and late-game combat and gods are units who join really good and stay really good. And they join early enough, and late-game combat units are really good late-game units who have very good combat. And I'll start off with a unit that you might not have expected me to put here. Rachel. Rachel is a late-game combat unit who has just okay base stats. She's 20 speed at least, and I believe 15 strength, 20 speed, which isn't the best, but it's not the worst. Her stats are just good enough to help out in the maps where she's around. Alongside her S rank in bows, giving her extra hit and crit with, say, rifle bows, or silver bows, or killer bows. Yes, she's generally outclassed by other units, but it doesn't really matter since she's still really, really helpful for the last couple chapters. And I believe she supports her father, Frederick. Speaking of Frederick is a general with capped defense, I believe 57 base HP, like 25 base strength. He's really good. He's closer to a Goto, I guess, but he actually has really good growths, with the exception of capped defense, and I believe with the exception of HP, defense, and res, I'm pretty sure. All of his growths are 100 or 200. Well, that doesn't matter here, but what does matter is that he has double S ranks in lances and axes, and really good stats. However, his low movement is the one downside to him, because I believe only Sean and maybe Ben can pick him up, and I wouldn't be actively deploying them in the late game. Next up is Gary. Gary is God. He would have fit in gods if he was around longer, but sadly, he's not. But it doesn't really matter, because Jesus Christ, his stats are so good. He has base A-rank bows, A-rank axes, with base 57 HP, 28 strength, 25 skill, 25 speed, capped luck, 17 defense, 13 resistance, and 13 con. He is so good. With the Brave Axe or Brave Bow, he will be doing massive amounts of damage. Because he has nearly capped strength. He's the highest strength out of any unit in the run, I'm fairly sure. Unless Frederick has higher. Frederick is 26. Yeah, he's so good. He's the fastest unit that we have access to, by far. And he is going to be one of, if not the most helpful units in the last couple chapters. Just because his combat is so good. And he's not that hard to pick up, too, because 13 con means that units like Liam and I'm pretty sure Levion can pick him up as well. Long-term use. I'm just going to put these units in here at the same time and then talk about them all at once. Is there anyone else that goes in there? Oh yeah, I forgot Yue. Yue is just in mid-game combat. He can also technically be in utility because he joins... yeah, right there. It's right. He gets E-rank stabs, and he's, like, worth promoting, but he's not that good. In the long term. Because he's just not worth training because he gets outclassed by this guy. So the last of the units that are left are all going into the gods here. But to go over these units, Haas, the best combat unit in Siegfried mode, when it comes to pure raw stats. I believe he has 17 base strength, 15 speed, C-rank swords, A-rank bows. He's a horse. He has, I believe, 43 HP. He's very good in Siegfried mode, and when he rejoins, his stats don't hold up as well, but he's still powerful, and he still packs a huge punch because he rejoins right before Wyvern Valley with good enough stats to be deployed there and to shoot down wyverns with silver bow, killer bow, rifle bow. And he's really good at combat in the chapter where he joins, so it's not hard to get his bow rank up in the one or two turns where he'll be present there. Next up we have Tekun, who you might be surprised to see so high. Tekun's base stats are just good enough that with his promotion, with his promoted stats, I'm not going to talk about his bases because he needs 4 levels to promote, which is easy enough. So with his promoted stats, he has 29 HP, 12 strength, 12 skill, 15 speed, 5 luck, 8 defense, 3 resistance, 10 constitution, 6 move. And at minimum, B-rank swords, because he has to do at least gain 10 weapon rank. He is His speed is the same as Liam's, to put this into perspective. And yes, swords aren't as good as bows are relatively to the game. It doesn't really matter because he gets a passive crit bonus. He's really easy to train. He has a fast enough support with Kellock in the early game to make it somewhat worthwhile. He becomes a decent Silver Sword chip bot who's hard to double and hard to kill because it takes 33 magic magic attack to one-shot him, which some enemies do reach, but he also has enough. He has decent enough avoid. Yes, he's mainly really good in a Groats run, but he's still useful here. He's like Rutger in an FE6 0% run. Really good, and like the last chapter I'll be deploying him is the chapter where this guy joins, Liquid. In theory, at least. Liquid is incredibly strange to talk about because his base stats aren't that great. He's mainly a pre-promoted growth unit, but he has lethality and a crit bonus. And that makes killing some enemies a lot easier, because it means that, like, with a killer axe, he has really, really high chances of just killing someone with either a crit or lethality proc, which is very helpful. Yes, his base stats, as I said, aren't the best, but they're good enough. Will he be the best unit in the game? No. Will he be very helpful? Yes. 39 HP, 18 strength, 10 skill, 18 speed. Those are pretty damn good base stats, actually, with base A rank axes. So he's close enough to S rank, which gives him extra hit and crit, which increases his chances of getting lethality or crit proc. So he's very helpful. He can Dragon Axe Wyverns, he can climb mountains, he can water walk. He's just everything Mark wishes he could be, in essence. Next up is Rana. Rana he's technically in late game combat, but it's mainly for his staff rank because he joins with 20 magic and C stabs, and that's all you need to know. Once I get him up to the area when he can use them, he'll be able to use status stabs really well. He'll be able to heal high with physic with good range. If Rescue and Warp are in this game, will have higher range with him than another staff unit. And his combat is not the best, but it's good enough because he can hit hard enough. He can hit really hard with Flux and other Dark Tomes simply because of his massive 20 base magic, which is the highest in the game. Next up is Emma. Emma is a very weird unit. I'm sorry I didn't have notes pulled up beforehand, so I just have to quickly check these with Oife. But Emma, upon promotion, has 29 HP. Instant promotion, I should say. 29 HP, 8 magic, 7 skill, 10 speed, 2 luck, 12 defense, 15 resistance, 7 con, 8 move. She also has base B rank stabs. Instantly. And she's mounted, which is very, very helpful. Sorry about that. I've broken out into a coughing fit and didn't want to have that on recording because some hair got in my mouth. Anyway, yeah, Emma is very close to B rank stabs. She will be the first unit to reach B rank stabs, because Tamiko sure as hell isn't getting it. She joins the promotion and she'll be instantly promoting. B rank stabs makes her an 8 move recover bot. She'll have easy access to warp and rescue if they're in the game. Her combat isn't very good. I'm not going to deny that, but that's not why I'm using her. She is by far the best staff user in the game, in my opinion. Even in growth runs, she is the best staff user in the game, especially in growth runs. Next up is Risk, a Swordmaster who's just a straight upgrade from Tekun, which is why it's probably going to be his join map is probably going to be the last time I deploy Tekun, because he is 44 HP. Yeah, he has base 44 HP, 15 strength, 22 skill, 18 speed, 20 luck, 11 defense, 10 resistance. He has much better combat stats. He has A rank swords at base. He is a passive crit boost. He is much bulkier and faster than Tekun ever will be. He's higher luck, so he's less likely to get crit. He's more likely to get crits because of his higher skill. He joins with a sword that is very good for him. I believe that with a tiny bit of chip from likely Tekun or maybe even Ben, he can one round the boss of his join map with a crit from his joining weapon. He's just a better Tekun, in essence, and Tekun's already a very helpful unit for the run, so he's a very, very good pure combat unit. Next up in the Gods tier, I'm going to be talking about these units in depth individually. First up is Shadow, and I might be wondering why I have Shadow placed so highly when he's technically a late game combat unit and in long-term use combat. Shadow is the only reason why I think some bosses can even be killed, because their stats are so absurdly high that they risk kill that all of my units don't really stand a chance against them otherwise. Shadow's stats, while not super impressive, do not matter because of lethality. 34 HP, 15 strength, 22 skill, 21 speed, 10 luck, 13 defense, 9 res. Those aren't that high, but most bosses in the game aren't immune to silencer, and the ones that are a lot easier to deal with than the ones that are immune to silencer. I have ways of dealing with them. There are some bosses that I don't think would be possible without Shadow, which is why I'm placing them so highly, because they are either really impossible or next to they're either impossible, nearly impossible, or incredibly difficult to set up without heavy rigging, without heavy crit rigging, which yes, I technically would have to do with Shadow, but it's rigging one lethality proc or multiple crits from units who might not have the best hit. One of those is a lot more reasonable. That's really all I have to say. He's an assassin, and he can kill. He's the only reason why I believe the run is possible past chapter 24. Next up is Leopold. Leopold is very good, very, very good combat stats. He has really good weapon ranks of B rank swords, B rank lances. I believe he's base 22 strength. He's very bulky. He's a flyer. He can take the Delphi shield, which we can get early on in theory. Yes, we pass up a lot of money and an S rank lance, but we don't have that many good lance users anyway. And he's just super useful to have around. Think of like Milady in FE6. He's in essence just Milady. And speaking of Milady, Alice is basically Milady after training. She and Leopold could be swapped, and there wouldn't be that much of a difference. She just has more luck, and she has more luck and speed and better weapon ranks in exchange for less bulk, which I think is a fair enough trade. Both of them are still really good and some of the best, if not the best, combat units for the late and end game, which is why I'm putting them up high. They're massively helpful. Alice can use every non-legendary sword and lance in the game at base. She will be probably the first lance user to reach S rank lances, aside from maybe Howard. And yeah, she'll just be very, very helpful. Real quick, I'm just checking something. I'm pretty sure I have this right, but it's just the notes for these last two guys. Yeah, okay. Okay, these last three guys. No. Howard is next. Howard is really good. Think of Marcus. He is base 38 HP, 18 strength, 12 skill, 20 speed, 10 luck, 15 defense, 10 res, 11 constitution. He also has A rank swords, B rank lances, A rank axes. He is so good. He is absurdly helpful. He joins in a few chapters after the best combat units start falling off. The best mid-game combat units start falling off. He joins in Wyvern Valley I'm pretty sure, with a Dragon Axe, and he doesn't even need it because he can use the Silver Axe or Killer Axe at base, with those he really deals with Wyverns really well. He is actually good 1-2 range in an enemy phase focused game, which is very rare because most of our units are super squishy. His combat stats are awesome. 20 speed is really, really nice to have in a game where most enemies are pretty fast. And yeah, he doesn't have perfect weapon ranks like near perfect weapon ranks like Marcus does. He has better weapon ranks than the probably best unit in the game. Next up is Liam. Well, I'll put these two because I don't care about the order. These two are definitively the top two in my opinion. Your opinion may differ, but in my opinion, these two are definitively the top two. I'll talk about Levion first before getting into why I think Liam is going to be incredibly helpful, and he's pretty much the only reason why I believe the run is even possible. Levion, 52 HP, 20 strength, 22 skill, 16 speed, 12 luck, 20 defense, 12 resistance, 14 constitution, with base A swords, C lances, A axes. He has worse weapon ranks than Howard's, but better stats in the areas that matter. There is an item called the Ether Sphere that we will be getting. This is going to go straight on Levion. I won't spoil what it does, but it is a stat booster that is incredibly stupid once you learn what it does. It will make him definitively the best unit in our army. He has massive strength. He has access to using silver swords, silver axes, hand axes, javelins, he has access to killer lances, killer axes. Yes, his damage might be worse than Howard's because Howard doubles more enemies that he doesn't. It doesn't really matter because he is much tankier than Howard, and that means that I can throw him into expose him to a lot more enemies on enemy phase than what you might think than what Howard can face, and he'd come out on top most of the time because enemies that get weighed down by like Steel Lance Wyverns, both of them will double. He'll do more damage and he'll have an easier time one-rounding because of his much higher skill and strength. Next up, and last up, is Liam. Here's my profile picture. Liam's stats are stupid. Keep in mind, he joins you in Chapter 17, so keep this in mind. In Chapter 17, you get a mounted unit with 7 move, that has 42 HP, 17 strength, 15 skill, 16 speed, 12 luck, 13 defense, 10 resistance, and 11 constitution. With A-rank swords and bows, joins with a silver bow and silver sword, is incredibly easy to recruit because he does not fight you, unless you fight him. Joins right when units like Kellock stop being able to solo maps. And in my run at least, he takes the first energy ring and very, very, very likely the boots. So that he's a 9-move combat unit with insanely good combat because he has access to every non-legendary sword and bow in the game, and we're not even getting the S-rank sword. So he's getting the S-rank bow, which boosts his speed by 5, which gives him 21 speed if I don't give him a single stat booster, which I'm going to do. He's one of the very few enemies that can very feasibly face and kill bosses in the late game. He's one of the very few bosses enemies that can actually chip the final boss safely. If I can, I'm going to give the kill to Liam, just because I believe he's going to be the most helpful unit in the game. I don't think he has any useful or fast supports, but it doesn't matter. He might support Sean or Anakin, but it doesn't really matter. And just his stats are so good. His weapon ranks are so good. He joins at the perfect time. He joins with starting weapons, which I normally wouldn't give him credit for, but he joins with weapons that he can use to make the next couple maps incredibly easy. He's able to feasibly take on bosses that would give any other unit trouble, like Howard in Chapter 18. He can use rifle bows, I'm fairly sure. I'm not sure if they're sniper only. They might be sniper only. But if they're not, he can use rifle bows incredibly well. I believe Storm can use them, so I'm pretty sure he can use them. And yeah, he has no real weaknesses other than the fact that his bow rank is harder to get up his bow rank would be harder to get up, and he doesn't have easy access to good 1-2 range, even though the short bow is 1-2 range and gives good weapon experience. It isn't the strongest weapon, mainly to compensate for the fact that there are a lot of enemies that have it in the early game, in Siegfried mode. And yeah. That's pretty much it. That's all I have to say. If there are any changes you would suggest making, if there are any questions you have, do let me know in the comments. Actually, let me just check real quick to make sure that I agree with everything I say here. I do, yeah. Units like Liuk don't really matter where I place them. The units in utility aren't really ordered, and little to no use aren't really ordered. Every other tier is considered ordered, because it's based on how useful I think they will be, not how good they are. Because like there are units who would be pretty decent for this run, but I don't think they're going to be that useful. For instance, Kevin is very decent for Siegfried mode and early Anakin mode, but I don't think he's going to be that helpful because it was for move. If you want me to, if you have any questions, do let me know. I'm open to reorder the list, and if I do, I'll post it on Twitter. Speaking of which, I'll leave a link to my Twitter in the description this time, just so you can follow it if you somehow haven't already. And yeah, I'm sorry that this has taken so long to get out. I'm sorry that it's been so long since I put up an actual chapter. Chapter 5 is just not something I find fun to play. And yeah, I hope you had a good time watching this, and I hope you have a nice time after watching this. I don't really know how to end off a video, so I'll see you around, and have a nice day.